on with our webinar. All right. Welcome to Developing a Winning Cost Volume Course Preview webinar. So today's webinar is a 1-hour webinar that I'm going to cover. I'm the instructor, so you don't see me sitting in front of you teaching this course, and I sit in front of a computer and I don't see your faces, so it's almost like doing radio, but not quite. My name is Alessia Smatrova-Taylor. I am an APMP Fellow and President and CEO of OST Global Solutions. I have a track record in this field. I've won over $19 billion in new business. I'm also a president of APMP National Capital Area Chapter, and if you haven't heard about APMP, you really should check it out. It's a wonderful organization for proposal professionals, not only proposal managers, but also capture managers, business developers, pricing personnel, so all the people who are related to the business of capturing contracts for your company. I have spent about 18 years in business development and have worked for 4 out of the top 5 government contractors and some Fortune global companies as well. And I have recently written a book on how to get government contracts, have a slice of a $1 trillion pie. Now, the pie is shrinking. I know things are going on right now that are pretty scary. It's almost like essentially there was a deal that was designed on purpose that was supposed to be really, really bad. And it was designed to be really, really bad as far as cuts were concerned on purpose, so that people wouldn't want to actually get to that situation or would have to have that. And unfortunately we did. And we're finding ourselves in that environment, and we all don't know how it's going to affect government contracting. But we also know that there are all kinds of things that are going to have to go down. Things are going to get more competitive. Some contracts may have to be rebid. We are going to be finding ourselves in an environment where we're fighting for less and less dollars in an environment that's moving towards lowest price technically acceptable, where the government is really motivated by the budget cuts. They still need to get the work done, but somehow it needs to be cheaper, and there's all kinds of dangers lurking in that environment. So this course is very timely. How do you actually win in cost volumes? Get your copy of the book on Amazon. It's still going to be relevant no matter what the environment is. It's going to actually show you the whole life cycle of business development, but today we're going to focus on the cost. Before we do that, though, let me tell you a little bit about OST Global Solutions, my company. So in case you haven't worked with us, and we have some new people on the call, some of our existing clients. Somebody put a timing into my presentation, so I apologize. So if the slides actually start jumping around. But we are an end-to-end business development support and training proposal house in Rockville, Maryland, Washington, D.C. area. And we have over 900 fully vetted capture and proposal managers, writers, graphic artists, orals coaches, so anybody that you would need to help you in this competitive environment. And help you support your proposals. We have Bid and Proposal Academy. I'll tell you more about it towards the end of the class. But today we're covering a course from the Bid and Proposal Academy that is focused on winning in cost volumes. And we have a track record supporting 18 out of the top 20 federal contractors, and we've won over $19 billion since 2005, since we've been in existence. All right, so let's get started with what it is that the course actually covers. And I'm going to tell you 2 things during this webinar. Some of this is going to be the material ripped straight from the course that we're going to cover, and you're going to get value out of this, actually learning some techniques, things that you can apply right away to your proposals. And another one, it's going to show you what's in the course, but it's not going to bore you in the sense of, hey, you know, I'm going to learn about the course I may or may not attend. What you're going to get out of this is the amount, sort of the big picture and the kinds of skills you would need in order to win in cost proposals. So don't look at it as a way to really kind of wonder how is this relevant to me. Really look at it as I would need to know all this in order to be really successful in this highly competitive environment. So look at it from that perspective. So here's what the learning curve really looks like for people who are trying to raise their win probabilities through the cost volumes. So you start with number one. You have to understand the terminology and the basics of cost volumes. So you may have people who do cost volumes all the time on this call, but a lot of people on this call are also proposal people, proposal writers, proposal managers, capture managers, people who are not necessarily the finance or the numbers folks. So you want to make sure that you understand all the terms and you understand the basics of what is actually going on in the cost volume. You also need to learn where proposal managers, capture managers, technical volume leads can make the difference throughout the cost volume development process and how. That is really important because you are a key piece to the cost volume. It should not be developed in a dungeon somewhere, locked up with a separate team that is really never talking to the technical team. So it has to be done all in concert, and we're going to talk about it a little bit more in the course of this webinar, but it has to be that integrated process, and you have to be part of that. As you are learning more on how to be a solution in making your cost volume better, you have to learn how to help with key pieces of the cost volume and the technical volume development that has to do with price. The work breakdown structure, you have to understand how those are formed and how they actually impact your pricing. You have to understand how to formulate assumptions, and assumptions usually is one of those things, and we're going to talk about them more in this class, but assumptions is one of those things that can actually make or break your price, what you end up charging the customer, and in some industries more so than in others. The basis of estimates. You have to understand how to do the basis of estimates. Basis of estimates are actually a task for a technical team, even though it's a huge component of the cost volume. Price to win pricing strategy, that's a huge component of winning. It has to do with actually the numbers, offering the right price that beats your competition, that doesn't hopefully leave the money on the table, but it's something that makes you prevail in this particular race in which you're playing at the moment. And finally, discover how to create a winning cost volume narrative. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this in this webinar. So that's kind of your roadmap to getting to be successful in the cost volumes. So the purpose of the course is essentially helping the capture proposal managers, the writers, and even people who are doing more of the cost volume and they're interfacing with the technical personnel to make sure that the win rate that rates that they're experiencing are not at the mercy of others. If you're a proposal manager, if you're a capture manager, you have to own the cost volume. If you don't own the cost volume, then your win rates are inevitably going to be lower. So this course will help raise your win rate through successful cost proposals. So let me see here. I have here a person who is saying that, let me see here, there are audio problems. Can everybody else hear me okay? Somebody is having issues with hearing me. Are you able to hear me well, guys? If you could just please let me know. Let's see here. If you raise your hands, by the way, I really can't see. Okay, so people are saying the volume is okay. So it may be whoever cannot hear me well, it may be the problem on your side. This webinar is being recorded, so what is probably happening is either the volume or the phone line. So if you guys cannot hear me well, that may be an issue. You may want to listen to the recording later. It's going to make it a little bit easier. All right, so let me get back to the class and let me know if something is going on where all of a sudden my sound has dropped out. Well, we're at the mercy of technology and internet, so in this particular case, there's very little I can do to help, but we can always, have a workaround solution if things get really bad. All right, so the other purpose of the class is to understand the three most important characteristics of a great cost proposal, which are the right price. Of course, You have to make sure that the numbers are right. It doesn't matter what you do. If your numbers are so out of line where you couldn't possibly win, or they're not the lowest price technically acceptable not the lowest price in an LPTA environment, should I say, you're not going to win. So the right price is a key component, and you have to be part of developing that price. Another one is persuasive supporting narrative that makes your price believable while making your competition look phony. Make them look like they actually don't know what they're doing while you're the only one who does. So that's what the narrative, really good narrative, can do. Explaining the prices. No, the cost people who are evaluating your cost proposal probably don't care so much about the selling of the solution and a lot of things that you may do in a technical. However, if you tie all of those components to your price, then it's going to really matter to them. They are people. They're, a little different. I've heard that argument sometimes with people, well, they really don't care about your narrative. Yes, they do. If you do it right, they actually do, and we're going to talk about that. So a story and pricing consistent with your offer in a technical volume, meaning that whatever you give them in the cost volume has to actually agree with what you've written in a technical, and vice versa. It has to be consistent. It has to tell that coherent story. So you also, through this course, what we try to do is we would try to reduce the intimidation factor for those who are not the numbers people, and even those who are numbers people but are just new to in this government contracting environment, or may have not kind of learned, you're not necessarily new, but you haven't really done a lot of sophisticated kind of large bids where you have to apply some strategies. We're going to talk about some strategies that you could apply here today. There's going to be a sliver of what we cover in the course, but it's going to be useful to you, and you can apply it right away. And also, it will help you learn the basic and advanced principles of winning and cost volumes. Exactly what do people do in order to be successful. So I really cannot drive this home enough, but given how important is the cost volume, which is the most important part of your offer, and certainly in today's economic environment, in a political environment, it is often the most important part of your offer. You cannot afford to miss the opportunity to have your hand in it. So everyone who is more on the technical side has to ensure that they are involved, and everybody who is doing the cost volume has to pull their technical people in and get them educated, get them all trained, get them literate in making sure that they understand what it is that you do. The BD people help promote what you do, help you do it while you're doing it, like the WBS, the price to win, all of that involves the technical personnel's involvement, and they support you. So on both sides of this puzzle, where you have the cost volume leads and the technical personnel, you have to make sure that both sides are really pushing in the same direction. So let's talk about course content. One of the pieces, one of the modules in the course is about the narrative portion. We're not going to talk about numbers in the short webinar format. We simply don't have time. But what we're going to talk about is what can you do in the narrative portion of the cost volume. The first rule with the narrative is you have to get rid of the tired, horrible boilerplate that cost people have been reusing from proposal to proposal because they don't know any better or because they haven't been offered any help. Boilerplate in the cost volume is just as offensive as it is in the technical volume. And we're not talking probably product bids in this particular case. We're talking about services bids, we're talking about solutions bids. You really should not be having the same cost volume text slightly adjusted for every proposal you submit. What you want to do is you want to ensure that your narrative, first and foremost, agrees with the requirements in your approach, not because it's recycled from some other proposal where something else was required and it gets plopped into this proposal and the customer is wondering, why is this section here? It has to tell the same story. You want to also write an executive summary for the cost proposal where you can explain the cost implications of your solution. So Again, it's not the same executive summary that you have written for your technical, as many people do. Kudos to you for including an executive summary into your cost volume. But the problem is that it's not really getting the evaluators much further down the road of understanding your cost solution and selling your cost solution to them. You want to showcase specific cost savings in that executive summary, or value added if this is the best value evaluation factor. You also want to include incentives and other labor compensation and retention features. How are you going to retain personnel? If this is personnel heavy, if this is services related type of stuff, type of bid, then you want to make sure that you talk about how you're going to keep people. And I'm not talking, again, like a help desk kind of environment where the customer knows there's going to be a lot of turnover. What we're talking about is how you're going to keep your key personnel, how you're going to keep your highly educated personnel if the customer really cares about retaining. So here's an example of how you would, for example, include that incentive. So we implemented a program management incentive bonus plan that is funded through an ODC charge. It is an incentive bonus program for superior contract performance. This program rewards technical contract managers and project leaders with added compensation based on performance and management of the contract. And you can formulate things like that. Those are innovative types of solutions that you can still implement in a lot of environments today that will show to the customer that you are leveraging all the resources in your disposal in your organization, and you are being smart about retaining people. So that is very much part of your cost volume in the situations where it involves personnel. What you want to do is you want to not accept cookie cutter text. A winning cost proposal cannot be an exercise in cutting and pasting material from other places. You have to approach it like another volume of your proposal. The original type of material has to go in, and it is very specific to this customer. And you also want to think of a cost volume not as a bunch of boring ants on the page kind of text that really will put anybody to sleep. Mind you, your cost people are generally the ones who are capable with standing lots of text, but you don't want to torture them. You want them to feel like it's a pleasure of reading your volume, so you want to include some graphics that demonstrate cost savings and efficiencies. Ways of making sure that you are giving the government or your customer the most effective, cost-effective, and efficient solution in the circumstances. So you should be able to show them where you're cutting out the fat and how you're doing things to save them money. So there are many variations, of course, of how the cost proposal should be organized and laid out. If no instructions are provided, you want to include kind of typical sections in the cost volume. But generally speaking, you want to always follow the RFP. So your instructions to the offers, your section L, your evaluation criteria, your section M, your statement of work, your section B, or any other instructions, templates that the customer may have provided for you for the cost volume. And sections that are really good to include, for example, that people really don't think about a lot, are your compensation plan. If it's not included elsewhere in the proposal, you may want to put it here. Incentives to key personnel. Again, if not included somewhere else and talks about numbers, then put it in. You want to use well thought through graphics to depict your key pricing themes and discriminators. So even though you may not use like a cost-cutting type of graphic, at least think of one graphic that really shows your overall approach and solution to cost-cutting. Most price evaluators will gladly use a picture to make their evaluation easier, so don't think of them as someone who is only concerned with Excel spreadsheets. Sections that are typically included in the cost volumes, you'll have your compliance matrix. Executive summary. Never, ever, ever skip an executive summary. And we're going to talk a little bit more about an executive summary here. You want to include your proposal basis and a DCA and DCMA contacts and system approval status. A lot of times you'll be asked for that information. A schedule, if that applies to your project. You're going to tell them you take no exceptions to the RFP, or if you take exceptions, you need to explain them. Again, my word of warning there in government proposals, the way that the rules, especially federal, the way that the rules go, for a lot of services and solutions proposals, they cannot compare apples to apples if you take exceptions. So usually taking an exception means that you are pretty much non-compliant. So you have to be very careful of that. Work breakdown structure and work breakdown dictionary is another component of your cost volume. Cost estimating techniques that were used, fee profit statements, the CLIN cost breakdowns, Excel spreadsheets, DOEs, and so on. So there could be all kinds of sections in your cost volume. You need to understand how they're written. You need to take a look at good cost volumes to see how people write them. But really think about original text, original solution, less boilerplate, more tying this solution to exactly what the customer actually needs for this proposal. Executive summaries are really important for the cost volume. So executive summary will help the evaluators better understand your solution, and it will persuade them to select you. So you can't just cut and paste it from a technical volume. You want to rewrite it. You want to write it from scratch. And I know that it's kind of painful to hear because a lot of times executive summary in a tech volume requires a lot of work. But be prepared to do work here because it's really, really important to your success. So just like with the technical volume, I recommend a 6-part formula. This formula comes from direct marketing techniques that are designed to get people to make a decision in your favor even though you're not present there. Even though you're not there directly explaining things to them, selling things to them, trying to sway them to decide in your favor, they're still are going to decide in your favor. And I've come up with that in my course, Executive Summary Secrets. I explain that in detail. You can get that on our website. But to tell you a little bit about it and how you should structure it. Basically, the 6-part formula it starts with the hook. And the hook is essentially a way to lure the customer into wanting to read what's in your proposal. Instead of giving them a snooze pill and having them check out at "We're pleased to submit this proposal in response to the RFP umpty-yump. So whatever is the regular kind of language that people put in the first few sentences of the proposal. So you want to make sure that you give them a reason to read. And the next part is the win theme. You want to give them the overall win theme, and win theme has to be specific to the cost proposal. What it is about your cost that they should know, not just your overall win theme. Perhaps there could be elements of that overall win theme here, but what about your cost? That is really important. You want to introduce your team and the work share. They may not get your executive summary from the technical, or they may not read your technical, so you want to make sure that everything is crystal clear. The body of the executive summary will include the details of how you're going to cut costs, of what you're going to include. I'm going to talk a little bit more about what you could include into your body. The roadmap is how you've organized the cost volume, even if it could be just saying that it follows the instructions, or it could be something more complicated. And then call to action is one place where you could tell the government, hey, select us, kind of thing, in a more elegant way, of course, but tell them that you are the right company for them. You usually don't start your proposal with that. That's not what your hook is all about. But here at the end of the clincher is where you want to make sure that you say that you want to select you or you're ready to perform. So don't forget your excellent Dun & Bradstreet status and credit line. So your DNB ratings, financially speaking, they have to be included, especially if you're a small business, showing that you're really good with paying your contractors on time, subcontractors on time, that your credit rating is high, and to show that you're credit worthy. So a lot of the times the small businesses will reference a letter of credit here as well, and they will provide showing that they are able financially to perform this project. You want to also have a total price discussion, because in a technical you can't talk about the price normally. For most federal customers, you will not be able to mention anything about the price, but here in your executive summary, tell them. Tell them what it is. Why is it the lowest? Explain. You want to also emphasize how your costs are fair and reasonable, and how you accurately will track the costs. How will you make sure that it stays that way, not only through your estimate, but through your execution? Also, if there are any cost-cutting measures and efficiencies in your approach, here's a place to highlight them. You also want to prove that you've controlled costs well on other contracts. Here's where you talk about your past performance, but not in general terms, in specific terms, saying, hey, here's how I did that. LPTA ghosting. I'm going to mention a little bit more about this in this webinar. It's really not about LPTA, but we talk a lot in the course about the LPTA and how do you win an LPTA during capture and during proposal execution, because that's such a hot topic right now. But here's where you want to show that you are the only one that is truly technically acceptable, and you are the only one who can execute at those prices. Anybody else who may be bidding lower than you may not be technically acceptable. Will that help you? In most cases, probably not, but you can try. At least you may want to put that bug in evaluator's mind that they are engaging in a high-risk decision-making process, and they're engaging in jeopardizing potentially the project if they ignore certain factors that you present for their consideration. I've talked to evaluators who are evaluating the LPTA, and sometimes they have had their people cancel the bid because the contractor managed to scare them well enough, and they've reissued the bid in a different format when faced with the facts and evidence that this was not perhaps their best decision. Graphics. You want to make sure that executive summaries have graphics. At the very least, have a features and benefits table. But you want to make it more interesting and have at least one graphic. Generally, a rule for executive summaries is 50-50, 50% text, 50% graphics, because it's an executive summary. It gives a good overview of what's about to come and gets people to review it from sort of the high-level, big-picture perspective where you can tell your story succinctly and in one place. So, additional items that you want to discuss in your cost narrative, it's going to be win themes, discriminators that pertain to efficiencies and cost reductions. You want to have an overview of the approach from the cost perspective. You want a cost-price implications of major strategies. If you are essentially presenting something innovative in your technical volume, you want to discuss it here. You want to see, hey, here's how we are going to alleviate the risks. Here's how we're going to make sure that this is realistic from the cost perspective. This is where you convince them that, in fact, any innovation does not carry that sort of potential burden of making the whole project at risk. Emphasize how costs are fair, reasonable, and realistic, especially in the LPTA world where people may buy their way into contracts and then fail the contract. That's where the quality goes down the toilet, down the drain. That's where you want to make sure that you kind of showcase how your price in the most important parameters that make this project a success actually matters, and the only price makes sense. So imply that other solutions are not technically acceptable because they're going to fail along those key parameters that you've set, key success factors. So show your estimating approach. Discuss what estimating approach you have chosen. Why did you choose this estimating approach? In our course, we cover the details on what kinds of estimating approaches there exist. But here you may want to defend your method. How will you accurately track and control costs? How well have you controlled and managed costs and subcontractors on other contracts? And you want to also indicate that your cost system has been audited and approved by DCAA and meets all the CASB standards. And you want to include graphics and visuals at least on every other page. So we talked about that proportion of the graphics versus the narrative. So let me tell you a little bit about the course, and we'll then continue diving into different cost strategies you could apply and different ways of helping your cost proposal team in winning. So here's how this works. Here's your sort of body of knowledge of what it takes for a person to really be adept at winning in a cost volume. So Module 1 in our course is Cost Proposal Foundations for Non-Finance Professionals. So that's where we cover the roadmap to winning in cost volumes, what you just saw. in the beginning of this course, and we really delve into the cost literacy, so show the differences between cost, price strategy, price to win, any components that go into costing, getting people comfortable with the cost volumes of what they look like, how to read them, how to understand the spreadsheets. Also talk about the contract cost principles and procedures and the cost accounting standards and cost and pricing data and different contract types that are important to pricing. That's where a lot of companies, by the way, make mistakes, because they really can get in a world of trouble if they don't price their proposals correctly given the specific contract types, because pricing really is driven by different contract types. Module number 2 is important details about cost proposal evaluation that impact cost proposal development. So cost proposal evaluation factors essentially really include understanding the difference between pricing strategies, best value, and lowest price technically acceptable evaluations, exactly what goes into those. Also, how evaluation criteria are weighted so that you can allocate your proposal resources correctly. You want to also understand proposal evaluators to address their key concerns, because the pricing evaluators actually have their very specific items that they have to see addressed in the cost volume. And those are the kinds of things that cost people may or may not know about, but you as a proposal manager, as a capture person, really should know about. You also want to understand evaluation intricacies and why, especially, the government doesn't end up evaluating the price you have put in your cost volume. They don't. They actually come up with their own cost. And preventing them from coming up with something that they end up evaluating that's not in your favor is very much your job. You have to know how to do that. In Module 3, we show how the cost proposal management has to happen during capture. So you have to show how the cost team has to be involved during the capture process, how the proposal manager has to be involved in capture from the cost perspective, how you're going to determine different options for a solution, because your solution, your cost, you have to brainstorm on that. It doesn't just come to you during those 30 days or 15 days or however many days you've got to do this proposal. You have to prepare that in advance, and the cost is going to drive your solution. That's a huge factor in figuring out how you're going to price this thing. Sometimes the government will give you, like, here's a spreadsheet, here's the labor categories, here are the hours, just give me prices. In those cases, not much you can do. But in a lot of cases, you can actually show them how you can do work efficiently. You can come up with different ways of even, probably driving your, labor direct pricing down. So there are all kinds of tricks that you can actually bring to that environment. So you want to prepare in advance, and you want to determine your price competitiveness, and you want to help your cost team to be successful in that. So we actually do perform price analysis using a case study in this particular module, and get you comfortable with that process. Then we talk about price to win in Module 4, and we really look at how to perform labor rate analysis, how to perform competitive analysis with the pricing model. So different components of the price to win, at least you understand that. So it's not really a price to win kind of class, but you understand exactly what's being done. And then once you're educated on this process, then you can drive your company, drive your team in using that process and applying that process so that you can prevail and get your win rates up. So in a case study, we actually apply some strategies to arrive at the price to win. Now, managing cost volume development during the proposal is the next step in our course and the next step in your vernacular as the winning proposal manager, especially winning cost volume manager. So essentially, resource planning for the proposal to resource your proposal to win, reduce stress, and establish better control over the proposal budget is your first task. But then you need to kind of understand the cost volume development process steps, cost inputs into the bid no bid decision, how a proposal manager can facilitate the cost development process, and work closely with the cost team. Cost volume manager's roles, immediate tasks for the proposal manager that a proposal manager needs to really care about and while overseeing the cost team, and a set of tasks that have to happen from the kickoff on to be successful. Module number 6 is how to develop a highly persuasive cost proposal narrative. And I've covered a little bit of that content here, so you got a little bit of a taste of what we look at, and we talk in a bit more detail in the course, and give you some examples, and show you how to develop an annotated outline for compliant and compelling cost volume here. In cost volume refinement techniques, module number 7, we help you ensure that the cost and technical volumes agree, and share with you strategies and techniques to tweak the solution to bring costs down. And I'm going to give you a little bit of that taste today in this course, and some tips hopefully you can apply right away in your cost volumes. So module number 8 is developing all important assumptions for better price optics and modifications after the proposal award. So for you, as a proposal capture manager, you have to know how to develop and collect assumptions. And we're going to talk a little bit here on this webinar on that as well in a minute. How to help increase your cost competitiveness through the assumptions, and how to help improve your price optics. Module number 9 is how to develop a work breakdown structure. Everyone on the tech team has to understand how the WBS works, and what considerations go into that. How does the cost team weigh into that process, and how you're going to represent your solution, because the WBS is the backbone of your offer. So you want to make sure that you understand how you can essentially do that effectively. How to develop basis of estimates is your module number 10. Those are the dreaded BOEs. How can you ghost the competition? How can you provide the greater confidence for your customer? Not only fulfill the requirement, but actually give them something that they can chew on and understand that you are the only one. You're the best one to win this particular proposal. So you want to ghost the lowballers. If you have those competitors who are constantly buying their way into the contracts, those are the kinds of people you want to absolutely decimate in your BOEs. You want to absolutely make them look phony, look like they don't know what they're doing, and whereas you are going to come in logical, well-prepared, well-founded, and you're going to defend every little bit of your price so that the customer has huge doubts about anybody else's ability to do this effectively. So then in Module 11, we talk about price strategies to win in the price portion of your cost proposal. So that's about sharpening the pencils and applying the price strategies that are appropriate for different contract types. Price strategies for the cost type, fixed price, other contracts, how to win in LPTA competitions. Yes, we have like a huge module of that course about that. I'll give you all the secrets on that. And module number 12 is final tips on winning in a cost volume. So how do you go through effective cost volume reviews, and how to avoid intimidation factor in case you still are reluctant in learning on how to work with the numbers and you're afraid and you don't want to venture into that. So we kind of burst through that bubble and help you become more effective. Now, I'm not a cost person. I'll be the first one to admit that I didn't start out that way. I actually did not enjoy this, and yet I had to do this in order for me to achieve a high win rate, because I really could not rely and trust. Trust is a dirty word in proposal management. That's one of my dirty words, is trust me. You also want to maintain control. You always want to maintain control over your team, over what's going on, because you're not going to get to that deadline in style if you leave that be and you don't check every single deliverable that you have on a proposal. So you always want to be involved in every aspect. And if you're not involved in something that important to your win probability, then your win rate's probably going to be a lot lower than it could be in the natural environment. So also, usually, traditionally in our webinars, we give you something really cool for attending. So today we offer you $100 off on upcoming March and April courses. So if you wanted to take any of our courses, we have several cool webinars coming up. So developing a winning cost volume happens on March 21st and 22nd, but on March 19th and 20th we have advanced capture management course that's really great. for people who want to really master capture techniques. We have Advanced Proposal Management course on April 9th and 10th. We have April 11th and 12th class on winning multiple awards and task order proposals. That's a course specifically for people who are trying to maximize their win rates on IDIQs, how to get majority of the task orders that you bid on. So I show you specific examples, techniques. I'm teaching that course myself. So that's going to be a really cool course for you to go up against those who are very effective at doing that. And to annihilate your competition. In April 16th and 17th, we're going to be teaching a brand new proposal editing workshop. We have like 2 seats available in that course, but you can still sign up if you want to grab one of those seats. This turned out to be very popular, and it's going to be a really awesome class. Now, the training is live. 2 days in Rockville, Maryland, or remotely via webcast, and you can use the coupon code until midnight on March the 8th, until this Friday, so $100 off, and again, it's on any course through March or April. All right, so let's get back to our course. So one of the cool ways to win in the cost volume is to make sure that it actually agrees with the technical volume. That's one of those fallacies that I see all the time, and I'm talking about large government contractors. I'm talking about those who know better and still do this. That's one of the most common problems among the companies. In fact, small businesses have a bit of an advantage just because they're that much smaller. You kind of sometimes can't avoid it, so you get involved anyways, like especially when the CEO is the one that's doing the whole thing. So that's when they become the most congruent offers. But once you get bigger, that's when it becomes a problem. So it has to be a conscious effort. So you want to make sure that you review the cost volume continuously to resolve any cost and scope variances. So anything that is all of a sudden different because you're here sharpening the pencils on one end, trying to get your prices down. On the technical volume, you still think that you're going to give them all the bells and whistles, and then the discord starts to happen, and very soon you're writing 2 very different proposals. You want to insist on cost team members' participation in the technical management color team reviews. And usually it makes perfect sense until you run into the time constraint. That pesky, I have only 24 hours in a day, but the only way that you can actually get around the time constraint is prioritizing. And this is your priority number 1. So you want to make sure that you understand that this is something you can't skip. So you want to practice in-process reviews. If people cannot get together in one room, have somebody from the cost team review it at the same time as you're developing the volume. You want to keep section by section status of the cost volume, just like you would any other section. You want to track it. Your best practice in the proposal management is you know on a daily basis how each section progresses. I usually give it colors. In the status here, you want to do the same thing with the cost volume. And you want to participate in the cost volume color reviews if you're the proposal and capture manager. You want to make sure that you read it, you look at the numbers, not only read the narrative, but look at the numbers as well. Because the numbers is what is really behind your technical solution. A lot of times I see people just avoiding that portion altogether. So you want to tweak the solution. You want to work closely with your cost team to develop different scenarios. So you want to select a different technical solution altogether, perhaps. Like if you are already, of course, in the proposal process, you may be way too late doing that. So that's why it's a huge argument for having capture. I have a question, by the way, here is could you go into PWBS and versus CWBS and how they tie into these reviews? Essentially, the PWBS versus CWBS, PWBS is program work breakdown structure. It's usually something that the customer does on their end, and CWBS is your contract WBS, and that is what you derive based on the PWBS, and that is the backbone of your pricing effort. That's the backbone for your schedule. That's the backbone for the way you present the solution a lot of times. A way for you to understand how the items in the statement of work actually relate to each other. So it's really related to overall solution architecture altogether. So in these reviews, you have to have that ready, or those reviews are really not ready to happen. So I don't know if that really answers your question, sort of trying to do this in a nutshell, because we don't cover that particular module in this portion of the webinar, in this teeny little webinar. But I hope this helps to at least bring some clarity into what those are and why those are so important, and why it's important for the proposal personnel and technical personnel to understand them and to know how to develop them. So now, the other way to tweak the solutions, you may want to use less expensive subcontractors for specific tasks. You may want to use them. You may want to use them at certain periods of time. You want to dispose of contractors at certain stages of the project, depending on what your teaming agreements actually stated or what flexibility they give you. You may use a little bit of subcontractors. You may use a lot of subcontractors. So, so there are all kinds of strategies you may want to think about when you are talking about subcontractor use. You may want to choose a cheaper sub, but have one of your people supervise the task rather than using your people to do the task. So that could be a strategy that you may want to apply in order for you to cut the prices down. You may want to increase managers' span of control to reduce headcount in the most expensive labor categories. That could be a solution. You may also want to reduce levels and layers of management. I know that a lot of people don't put fat anymore into their programs, but sometimes I see situations where people could be not billed 100% of the time unless the RFP requires that. So, you may want to show reporting structure where the program manager reports directly into the CEO, for example, if it's a small business. So all kinds of ways of justifying cutting down the burdens on this particular program. Don't bid expensive keys and SMEs at 100%. And by the way, for the earlier bullet, when I'm talking about burdens, I'm not talking about the kinds of things that are like your costs approved, but I'm talking about for this particular program, whenever you have the flexibility of having a larger management structure versus a leaner management structure, you really need to think about people who wear multiple hats so that you could reduce that management burden on the program. So don't bid expensive keys and SMEs at 100%. So when you have a really expensive resource, somebody at $250 an hour, $300 an hour, who is a real superstar and maybe of a huge value, well, put just a few of their hours on the program rather than bidding them full-time, and still use their fabulous resume to really sell in the proposal in discriminators, and the customer may love them. Government-furnished equipment may not be offered in the RFP, but you may know about the government-furnished equipment and that may be available. So always do your homework. Try to find out what may be used on this program. So more tweaking, and there's all kinds of these techniques. The reason why I'm throwing these techniques out to you is that you have to understand that there is so much to cost strategy. There's so many ways to play with the numbers, to game the system, so to speak, to get the prices down, to get the optics down. So you have to understand them as a proposal and a capture person. You have to understand your options. And even though you may not know exactly how to execute them on a spreadsheet, you should be able to suggest in the appropriate situations to your cost team how to do this. So any tips about structuring rates on IDIQ labor categories? This is actually kind of a bigger discussion, so we do cover that in a course specifically on what to do with IDIQs, but I'm afraid that if I start talking about it right now, I'm going to open a can of worms and it's going to be 10 million questions. We'll never finish on time. So on this one, I'm kind of going to back off. Are these types of things you should include in cost volume under your cost savings, or are these some of the things you could really not want to point out? That's a good question. So there are some things that may be cost savings, and you may want to point them out, and some things may be the things where you are making your costs look smaller, versus your competition may be too honest about it and too blunt about it, and then their cost may not be perceived that way. So, so that's where that's where you actually have to be very strategic. You have to be very selective. That's a great question that you've posed. So in some cases, those may be just obvious and tell people, look, you know, we've really negotiated this down. Here's what we've done, and take credit for it. In some cases, it's your gamesmanship that really is going to matter. So, so that's where the art comes in, and the judgment comes in of how you're going to go about each. So you may want to, you know, here's your gamesmanship part. Propose the bare bones solution and add bells and whistles and non-priced option. So sometimes you may not even want to give them the cost for some things. Sometimes you may want to price it as an option or as an alternative solution. If they actually allow you to submit alternatives, they may include them there. Sometimes, and there are some companies out there, there's all kinds of stuff that goes on in the cost volume. So you really need to be plugged in into that grapevine and to start getting comfortable with that language and the discussion of different strategies, because you hear about new tricks all the time. And then the government smarts up to those tricks and they put in measures and you can't implement them, and then they switch, and you know, somebody retires, and then that knowledge goes away, and they start from scratch, and you apply those tricks again. So it's kind of a game that goes on and on and on with your government counterparts, and like, there's some companies out there that essentially propose something that is very bare bones, that ultimately could not provide the results that the government is looking for without doing an engineering change proposal or an ECP to really truly implement it. Do I recommend that? Probably not. Probably, but there are lots of companies that are quite reputable that do that in order to win in this lowest price, technically acceptable game. And then they end up adding more scope to make up for that later down the road. There's all kinds of strategies. Do you want to be obvious about those? No. Do you want to apply them with extreme caution? Yes. But you want to keep them in mind as an option in some desperate situations. So you want to amortize tools or processes that have already been created on your other contracts or for research, independent research and development, and tie them to this proposal. You want to be very careful, of course, if the cost could be deemed unallowable if you're just trying to kind of pay for your IR&D through different proposals. So you want to make sure that you're creative, though, and you're using all the resources that have already been paid for and invested into, and bring them to bear. You may want to develop a more aggressive schedule. You may adjust the placement of personnel in required service labor categories. So when a customer mandates labor categories and hourly rates, there may be a midpoint rate for each labor category. And if you can do much of the work below that midpoint, don't blindly propose those midpoints unless required by the customer. So you have to really dive into that. So there's some more. You may want to establish a new cost center or joint venture for a new major bid to minimize overhead allocations that are not applicable to the bid. It's risky. There are lots of pros and cons on that. We talk a lot about that in class and how that works. You may want to relook at your overhead. A lot of companies right now in the LPTA environment are relooking at their overhead. You may find yourselves working remotely one of these days, even though the CEO of Yahoo is not allowing the remote work. We seem to be getting pushed into our home offices and maybe have like some sort of a landing cube for really big efforts at our environments, at our jobs right now, because the companies are trying to get rid of those big, nice offices that they've had because they can't afford them anymore. They're trying to get their burdens down, to get their rates down so that they don't have as much overhead. So you may use new systems, things that replace labor-intensive types of tasks in order for you to cut your costs down. So you want to ensure use of relevant cost standards for the types of work that you're proposing on. You want to review all the tasks and labor to ensure there's no duplication. add assumptions on time management and skills improvement. You want to break up whole tasks into what higher cost personnel would have to do versus lower cost personnel to make the work more efficient. Think about a lawyer model where you have a lot of work not done by the highly paid lawyers. They're done by people who are not paid squat, right? You want to reduce the number of procedurals, deliverables, reports to cut down on costs, and all kinds of other tricks. I mean, I don't really have time to dive into a lot of things that we discussed during the course, but here's a sliver of all kinds of things you can do. And really, I just want to open your mind. I want to open your mind to the strategies and really start watching out and listening for the strategies that are being cited out there and start collecting them. Become a collector of different strategies, and then you can apply them to your environment. The last portion of this course today is about assumptions. Assumptions are, and we don't have a lot of time to dive into that. We, again, today is not a 1-hour format. I usually am very ambitious to fit a lot of material into that format, and I inevitably end up running out of time. But assumptions is a way to basically discuss your proposal basis or ground rules. So you want to help determine if a specific task is part of the work or not. That's where you become crystal clear on what's included. Because if you are not crystal clear on what's included, then the customer will think everything is included. So that's where you want to draw that line. You want to be very precise about what it is that you will or will not do. And if they have to have it, then they have to pay you extra. So you want to then lay the groundwork for proposal modifications. So all of these assumptions have to be identified up front in writing, and they must be comprehensive, and they come mostly from the technical team, but they then make it into your cost proposal. Majority of the time, that's where they figure in. Sometimes they're included in the technical volume, but majority of the time, it's in the cost volume. So usual assumptions that you have are the simple ones. The cost team usually knows how to do them. So your proposal validity date, your start date, your costing start date, options descriptions, your customer funding plan, customer payment plan, any other assumptions, they will come up with that. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is helping collect additional assumptions that help with price optics, meaning that how is your price perceived? You can still give them a really amazing solution, comprehensive solution, but it doesn't mean that you're going to be doing it at your own expense. So assumptions are a key instrument for optics and getting the price down. It's either is a BOE or is a separate section. They're a challenge to document. For example, let's say you are refurbishing a facility, and your engineering team is really concerned. They say, look, you need to really price the utilities cost in order for you to be safely putting this facility online. This facility may not be operational and functional if the utilities are not there, but I'm afraid that's going to make us too expensive. Well, then you put an assumption saying the utilities are in full working order and will not require repairs. Like you haven't had a site survey, right? The customer hasn't had a site survey. They haven't told you anything. Your engineers are worried sick about that, and that you're never going to be able to get this facility functional if you don't have the right utilities coming in, like the electricity or water or sewage. So in this particular case, you want to document that. And then your price will still look lower because you didn't include that amount in there, and that's your basis for later negotiations. Storage facility will not require additional cost to upgrade and uses the same equipment listed in a task order requirements package. So that's another assumption. You know that most likely you're going to have to upgrade the facility. You may have to buy new equipment. It may be all complicated and expensive once you get into it. In it, you may be on firm fixed price. So it may actually cost you. So you better put there the kind of assumption that shows you while your costs are still low, while your price of the proposal is still low, that you have thought about it and you said, okay, I assume it's going to be all in the working order. It will not require upgrades and uses the same equipment. We could go into more detail on that, but I hope you get the idea of what the assumptions are there for. Don't dismiss them. It's your key task. A lot of the times it's the afterthought. It's like, well, have you guys come up with an assumption or assumptions? The technical team is not being pushed, so assumptions pop up all the time while they're brainstorming. and nobody is capturing those bits of gold that are spilling on the floor, essentially, and are being lost. So you want to make sure that you play a very active role in that. So before we conclude today, let me tell you a little bit about Bid and Proposal Academy certification program. So we have 5 types of certification in the Bid and Proposal Academy. You can learn more on our website on that. But we have 16 different courses, and we have 5 different tracks for business developers, capture managers, proposal coordinators, and proposal writers. And we have core classes, we have major classes, and we have elective classes. And you get to take 16 days of classes to get certified towards your profession, so you can get all the right skills in your particular field of endeavor. And of course, you get to do it in a more cost-effective way, speaking of cost, and if you actually purchase the certification package altogether. So if you're interested, let us know, and we'll be happy to help you. And if you are doing proposals, if you need consulting support, we have great consultants to help you. We have awesome training. We can take it in-house at your facility and customize it and tailor it to your company. And of course, don't forget about our special offer, $100 off from our March and April classes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stay here for just a minute longer to see if you have any questions about the material that was covered in the course today. And I hope that you found this course useful, and you go ahead and use the knowledge that you've acquired today, and hopefully you can even take our class where we dive into a lot of this information over the course of 2 days with exercises and examples and an opportunity to really explore some of these topics and make you more competitive and raise your win rates. All right, thank you, Debbie. Thank you so much for the compliment.